Hello, everyone.
Hello. Thank you on my behalf as well. As Annina said, my name is Hannu Oksa. I'm a creative director at Reaktor. And I'm going to be interviewing Shay today. Yeah, this is not going to be a traditional presentation in that sense. And we're going to have a conversation instead. So yeah, Shay leads... Shay, right? Shay?
Correct. Yes.
Shay is leading design efforts at Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones in New York. And he sits in the newsroom with all the journalists, which I think is really interesting, and which is kind of like where this idea of doing an interview in the first place came from. Me and Shay, we got to know each other a few years ago in New York. Reaktor was doing a project for Dow Jones, and I always thought that Shay's journey in design and his transition from doing branding in his own company to working in a newsroom and leading like a very heralded old brand in digital domains, I think that was like super interesting, and that's why we're having this conversation. I'm going to be trying and ask a bunch of questions that I think that would be interesting to you, but as Annina said, we'll also be having a Q&A at the end. You'll have the opportunity to ask Shay more questions. All right. Let's start from the beginning. You're from Melbourne, Australia, right?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Yes.
How did you get into design in the first place?
It's a good question. So I started my journey, I think, through taking art classes at school when I was quite young. And one of the first things that kind of really led me on a design path was winning a national competition through my kind of art abilities at the time when I was I think I was about 13 or 14, so a long time ago. And it was actually for a national competition on designing a phone card way before kind of smartphones and maybe even mobile phones at that time. And so the design kind of came through, obviously using kind of drawing and things at the time. And one of the prizes was a Wacom tablet, and I think it came with Photoshop LE or 1.5 or something like that at the time. And so that kind of led me to a journey of going from, again, kind of tactile craft art into the kind of digital space and translating that into design. I've always been kind of passionate about kind of the hands-on tactile piece. I definitely don't do anywhere near as much of that anymore, but I think it's something I definitely value and look for in kind of recruiting and working with individuals in the design space is people that really love what they do, and so I think that always resonates to me. Before you moved to New York, which was like, what, 3-4 years ago? Yeah, 4 years ago now, 2014. Yes. Yeah. You ran your own agency in Melbourne for quite a few years. And Beyond the Pixels, right? Or That's BTP. Right. Yes. It was actually funny because when we started working with Dow Jones, I wasn't really sure who you are, but then I spied on your LinkedIn profile and noticed that you had run BTP, and it used to be an agency that I was like a fan of, like 3,000 miles away from Australia in 2001 or something like that. That's right. Yeah. So I founded that. Before that, I actually worked in a publishing company and for our Australian Football League, and so through that kind of journey, I was there for about 4 years. I started winning the company a lot of branding and digital work. I was kind of tinkering around with kind of web development, software engineering at the time, as well as kind of brand identity work. And so I was kind of winning that. And through that process, I definitely kind of got a bit bored with the kind of templatized publishing every day, the same kind of format, and was way more interested in kind of the branding space and looking at kind of crafting those. So I went out on my own and ran that company Beyond the Pixels for 9 years. And look, it taught me a lot about obviously running a business, but also how to kind of look after and nurture creative individuals and how to build a business, how to kind of find the right space, the right environment to kind of foster good design, and also how to kind of manage client relationships and get the most out of those. So it taught me a lot. I kind of had 9 P&Ls through that time. And at the end of that kind of journey, well, through that, we probably had a couple of hundred different kind of clients over that 9-year kind of period, from all walks of life, from branding kind of whiskies through to rebranding 100 car washes across Australia. And we did a lot of the interior work and wayfinding systems and loyalty programs. And so we did a lot of the kind of upfront work. Kind of, I guess, design thinking workshops. We just called them branding workshops at the time. So we'd spend a lot of time with, getting the kind of key executives, or the, if they're a startup, just the founders in the room, and spending a week or so with them to kind of explore what their problems were in the industry and what they kind of wanted to solve. So we would kind of go along a journey from a branding point of view with them, and the touch points that would come out of it would, more often than not be digital work. So I think about 50 to 60% of our work was digital at the time, and brand identity up front. So from there, I guess I transitioned into kind of moving to New York. There's a reason behind that. My lovely wife, who's an architect, decided that she was kind of over Melbourne. And so we kind of, she decided to take the plunge. So I was kind of running my company at the time, very happy with how it was going. And as a transition, I kind of came over to settle her in, and through kind of stroke of luck and a friend, got introduced to Dow Jones and some people at the Wall Street Journal. I kind of changed my flights and spent a couple of extra weeks there, and ended up deciding to kind of sign a contract and close my business, which was a very big kind of change in my life, but a decision that I don't regret, because I think it's very interesting to have run an agency and then to kind of go in-house and work for a single brand, even though there's a portfolio of brands under Dow Jones, like something like the Wall Street Journal. It's a very big change, and it's nice to kind of focus on something and go really deep for a while.
Yeah, I mean that's super interesting. That transition from running your own thing, working for like tons and tons of different clients, and moving in-house to a brand that's like super old, super heralded, and in a completely new business to you, like news and media. How was that transition in retrospect?
So I think one thing I guess I wasn't used to, because I hadn't worked in a big kind of enterprise corporation, was that when there's 4,500 people, there's naturally changes afoot. So I came in, I wasn't the boss anymore, so that's a big change. Yeah. And from doing that, we were part of, at the time, so Dow Jones is set up, there's consumer-facing brands, the Journal being the biggest, and then there's some B2B kind of enterprise products as well that are more kind of data-centric and market data-centric. And so when I came in, there was a product team that sat across Dow Jones, and the whole design and product team were kind of together in that. After 6 months, like I was saying, things change a lot. There's reorgs and reorganizations quite often, and that's kind of a natural place. And so as part of that, the product and design team moved into the newsroom, which was kind of unsettling because I just relocated. But I think once I understood all the intentions and the kind of reasoning behind it, it made a lot of sense. And I think we've kind of flourished as a result. As part of that, I was kind of given a mandate to be able to hire a lot more people, have a lot more kind of ownership over not just reporting lines, but the structure of how the team was kind of organised. I had a lot more autonomy, but we were also kind of fused with our kind of core product, which is our content, and we were sitting right in the heart of our kind of our headquarter newsroom as well. So to kind of move into that and be able to form that and work on kind of building a team the right way was something that I kind of relished and was very excited to kind of take on.
Yeah. You kind of like touched on this briefly already, but traditionally when I look at design organizations in bigger companies, they are usually under business or under marketing or under IT. But as you mentioned, you guys got put into the newsroom. But what was that like?
Yeah, so I mean, it was a change. We had to go through a whole bunch of ethics and standards kind of compliance with being part of a newsroom. And since then, actually, I kind of dual report into technology and the newsroom. So some of my staff kind of are dual reporting as well. So we are kind of, we have this nice kind of, I guess, dual reporting structure where we have a tie to the newsroom and the journalism side of things, as well as the commercial side of the business. So I think in that respect, it's a nice structure. It kind of allows us to kind of be in the middle and kind of right in the heart of everything and get the best of both worlds.
So you've been at Wall Street Journal for about 4 years now in total, right? Yeah. So what have you doing during that time? What have you been working on?
Yeah, so I think back to your earlier question, I think the first thing I worked on was really kind of understanding a lot of the relationships in the company. So I kind of went on a kind of almost a fact-finding mission, a tour of meeting people, understanding what they did, understanding their level of knowledge on the digital design kind of domain and how they understood it. And particular, you know, I think, you know, there's a lot of legacy that comes with a newsroom like that. Not always bad, but I think people aren't very patient usually. When you bring in a really talented kind of product designer or a software engineer into a conversation with an editor, and they're talking about you know, building design systems and repeatable patterns and templatizing and reusability and all of those kind of things, a lot of that just goes over their head and they kind of just know what they want. And so I think there's an element of patience that needs to go along with a lot of those kind of things that people do. It's like kind of steering a 747 really slowly. And so that kind of fact-finding kind of, for me, is a trust-building exercise where you kind of establish a lot of relationships with people across the company, not just in the newsroom, but the newsroom's, you know, the core part of it all. And from that, you kind of, it's allowed us to kind of build better products as a result. Because otherwise, I mean, we have so many stakeholders. You know, not just the newsroom. We have people in marketing, obviously, right up through our CEO and the C-suite as well. So depending on what we're doing, how high visibility it is, it was really important, I think, for me to kind of establish trust through all those relationships. They hadn't had someone, I guess, leading a team like that before. I think a lot of the people had just been on the tools, and so for me to kind of come in and not, it was a change in perception of us being more of a service-driven kind of, I guess, design function to something that was really kind of, hopefully, in my eyes, adding more value, and showing that by doing. So first is kind of we established this kind of level of trust and went on kind of educating people about the things that we were doing. So I also changed the way we did a lot of things. So we had to present a lot of our kind of reasoning and rationale that we hadn't had to in the past, I don't think. And that changed the way people perceive what we did too. We don't have to do that anywhere near as much as we used to. So that's allowed us...
When people trust you, usually things get easier. Right?
Exactly,
yeah.
100%.
So what's your team like today, actually? Like how? What kind of people do you have? How do you guys work? How does design function at Wall Street Journal within the newsroom today?
So we're set up as actually product design and engineering. So we call ourselves PDE. And I think that's kind of the three legs of the stool approach, where like if one's not balanced right, it's a bit of a wobbly stool and nothing really works very well. So there's probably about over 100 in that kind of organisation, and then we also call upon Dow Jones' wider engineering organisation, which has about 500 software engineers in it. And so we've kind of defined what we say as kind of consumer-facing products as well as internal-facing. So consumer-facing would be things like our mobile apps, our website, off-platform experiences as well, like Apple News and Facebook Instant Article and stuff. And then we also have our internal-facing things like market data as a service. We have a huge team in Minneapolis that works on great market data experiences for us that kind of power things that we need to build. and search. So we have these kind of defined as kind of internal and consumer facing. And that's the way we organize the team. So out of that 100 or so list of people, we basically organize ourselves in, there's a product lead, a program lead, a project lead, a UX lead, a design lead, an engineering lead. And we also bolt on kind of extra depending on what it is. Usually there's always an editorial lead there, someone from marketing. So they're the kind of, not the same kind of model as like Spotify where you've got chapters and squads and things like that, but they're very much kind of agile teams that work together, that also kind of report back up into the larger PDE kind of matrix model that allows us to kind of make sure that we have a holistic view of our products. That's something I kind of firmly believe is really important. I think we were just having a good conversation before about what that leads to in terms of optimizing and things like that. So, while optimization is, and using data to kind of test and use multivariate testing and a whole range of other techniques, if you're doing lots of micro tests on a product, you can introduce a whole bunch of little inconsistencies. So if your kind of framework and your design system is not set up to deal with hundreds and hundreds of tests all the time, then the user experience from logging in to reading an article on mobile can be very disjointed because you've made a decision over here that's very different to the one over here. So our teams are set up still in that kind of holistic view where they all kind of talk and meet back in their kind of larger teams, as well as those teams that form around like mobile apps, for example, or web.
You mentioned design systems. It's obviously a tool, or whatever you want to call it, that a lot of different organizations are trying to implement into their product development practices to get consistency in a user experience, in your interfaces and whatnot, and obviously scale production as well. When we worked together in 2016, you guys were working on that design system at that time, and I saw a glimpse of it. It was like super impressive already at that point. What was the experience of building a design system to you guys?
So I guess I'd seen so many style guides when I started that were very, I guess, disconnected from engineering and from the product landscape at large, mainly kind of PDFs and things sitting in Google Drive. So we've since kind of built something that runs on GitHub, is very much connected to engineering. While it's not fully fledged across all of our products at the moment, we've definitely got it in a really good spot. What I did, I guess, was hire some kind of hybrid product design, front-end design people. And on that note, we've got a very kind of multidisciplinary team. When I started, there was very much kind of print people that had transitioned into the digital domain. So we've hired a lot more kind of specialized UX researchers, UX designers, product designers, as well as UI writers and things like that. So I haven't kind of asked them to necessarily build something. It just naturally kind of occurred. And I think through hiring those types of skilled people, and so that's just kind of something they've really taken on their own as part of that.
That's cool. I have to ask a bit of a more of a general question, not necessarily design related, I guess, but you work for this very old, well-known organization that also happens to be sort of run by or used to be run by Rupert Murdoch, and now it's Robert.
So Robert Thompson's the CEO,
yeah.
Rupert's the chairman of News Corp.
Yes.
Yep.
And owned by News Corp. I gotta work. What it is working like in an institution like that?
Yeah. So I think they really obviously care about the kind of media landscape. That's what they grew up with. That's what they've done all their lives. So, I think having a really diverse portfolio that News Corp does, with things like the Times of London, the Sun, the New York Post. We obviously have Barron's and Market Watch as well as the Wall Street Journal. But we have things like National Geographic, and so there's this really diverse kind of portfolio. but you can kind of tell that, you know, the level of care and everything that goes into kind of building a newsroom like that and an institution that's 130 years old, that there's a, you know, I guess you can just sense that there's such an importance kind of placed on its place in society and what it means to have an institution like that and a publication like that kind of continue on through an era where advertising industry is obviously really struggling, and print is really struggling as a result of that as well. So I think it's, you know, it was one of the reasons that I came on was purely because I could sense that I might be able to affect some kind of change at some level.
Kind of related to that, I think you're in a really interesting position in terms of what's happening in the political landscape and then also in the landscape of technology. Obviously, there is a lot of manipulation of opinions happening, and different digital tools definitely have a part to play in that, and not only in a positive way. Yeah. Fake news is a term we all know by now. What role do you think that design can play in combating something like that?
Yeah, I think it's huge. I was actually on a panel at a conference just recently talking about designing for trust with the partners of Pentagram and a couple of other agencies, and that came up, so everyone just looked to me. So I think design plays like a really critical role. I think one of the things that, and I didn't talk about this earlier, but that we did kind of go on through that fact-finding mission was, I guess, understanding the kind of the recognizable visual characteristics of the Wall Street Journal. The masthead is obviously a very recognizable characteristic. It's responsive, it's got a little WSJ as well. But we have these stipples, the kind of dot drawings, that every day is on the front page of the paper, and it has been for, you know, almost a century. And so through that, as well as the typography, there's these three kind of core ingredients to our kind of visual language that I think, you know, over that very long period of time and huge wide distribution of newspapers has played a big part in kind of trademarkable kind of visual cues for people. So I wanted to kind of go about extracting those and kind of putting guardrails around it so that the team were consistently using those. So our digital products use completely different typefaces. So the first thing I did was look at recutting those for digital. So we went on a kind of mission to do that. You know, all of those things, what they also do is then when you kind of come to the aspect of things like fake news, I think they kind of play a role in like initial kind of recognition of where you are and if it's trusted or not, based on the source. And I think all journalism comes back to the source as well too. So there's something nice in that. I think the ways and the pathways that you can get to content these days can be very far and wide. And things like Facebook as a platform obviously kind of very commoditize everything, make it very generic. So the visual characteristics, being able to place those on platforms like Facebook and others that are out kind of off platform that we can't control, become more and more important. So we've had to work closely with Apple News and you know, partner with Facebook and others to kind of figure out, you know, Google Amp's another great example, on how we can kind of bring in our kind of heritage typefaces, our masthead, those visual characteristics into those off-platform experiences that we normally wouldn't have control over, because that I think is a big way of helping consumers know whether something is real or not and comes from a specific source.
And the partners have been collaborative about doing that?
Yeah, look, I mean, they've got lots of other agendas at play. So, you know, I think it's one of those things that if all of the publications know that it's the right thing to do and they push back hard enough, then, you know, us, the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc., all do it, then we make a strong case.
You already mentioned trust, how important is that to build into the characteristics of products as well. But in general, what are the core principles of doing digital products, designing digital products, in your opinion?
Yeah, I can probably give you an example of one of the things that happened when we redesigned the iPhone app recently. Not core principles of designing digital products, but I can probably get to that. But through kind of organically working with a lot of different people across the organization, and a huge team that kind of was amazing to kind of go through this process together, we came up kind of organically with 3 core principles that were attached to news, and that allowed us to kind of, as a team, kind of really rally around building a design language that was way more sophisticated and way more kind of, I guess, connected to the content itself and the journalism in a mobile environment. So we had 3. One was, and I think this goes for any kind of news and publication, is like creating a sense of hierarchy. So if you don't know kind of what the hierarchy is and you can't navigate things, then it's very hard as a reader. And the second thing was conveying a sense of importance. So within that kind of hierarchy, how do you convey that something is more important than something else? So those 2 are very interlinked. And the third one, which is really important as well, is distinguishing different types of content, which is something we're actually experimenting with even more now. So one of the things it's worth knowing is that our editor-in-chief for the Wall Street Journal reports into our CEO at Dow Jones. We also have an editor-in-chief of the opinion section who reports into our CEO, so they report in separately and actually sit in different buildings. And so one of the things that, while we get to work with both, it's really important for people to understand the difference between hard news and opinion content, because often just in the digital world, they're very much mashed together. So how do you kind of...
And in terms of hierarchy, they look very much the same in a lot of different applications.
So what are the ways of indicating that immediately that you're reading a piece of opinion content that comes from a point of view versus something that has sources and is hard news and is objective journalism? So that's something that, I think is really kind of core to kind of how we do that. So those design principles, while they were news-led, were really important. We had 3 others, and they were more design principles. We had 3 others that were kind of, I guess, more on the emotional kind of trait side. So an example is, making, I guess, instilling a level of trust and confidence. Another one was, keeping people informed and feeling like they were up to date. So like that's an emotional response that you have. So if I'm consuming an app and it just keeps skimming through it like Twitter and never ends, then how do I know when I'm up to date? Like, how do I know that I've consumed enough? So I think there's a role that kind of design plays in that kind of anxiety as well, that plays into a lot of digital product experiences these days, like Instagram and a lot of the social media platforms. So I think we can kind of play a nice role in kind of informing that, because we know a lot of business leaders use it to kind of make decisions and be up to date with what's happening and feel like they need to be caught up. So, yeah.
Yeah, I've always personally thought that we've for a pretty long time in experience design, we've had this tenet of no dead ends, but sometimes actually I wish there would be some dead ends and have some kind of like a sense of closure to something that you're trying to experience. So a bit of a more general question. I think we have a few minutes left. What's the value that design brings to business in general? Because like you've had the opportunity to kind of look at that, the design's role in that, both externally working in your agency and later internally in an in-house team.
I mean, I think it's extremely valuable. I think the hard thing is that what you see in a lot of the big companies these days is you don't need as many designers as you need engineers necessarily. So most companies will feel very much engineering-led versus design-led culturally, and because there's a sheer weight of numbers. Even in ours, that's absolutely the case. So I think that's a hard thing. So I think showing the value just like visibly by having, on the P&L like this many people and this many people. But there's lots of other ways. I think my main thing is to not talk about the value design, but actually just show it. So I think one of the things that we've introduced to our team is internal newsletters that go out to the 4,500 people in the company that talk about how our thinking behind everything that we do and articulating that, which is great for them because they get a forum to kind of express it. And then also just projects where we've shown measurable value back to the business. So there's some good examples. We also, our recent kind of hire of CTO and Chief Product Officer, my boss, Rajiv, introduced the idea of OKRs, so objectives and key results, which are not a new thing at all. They've been attributed to a lot of Google's success in how they've kind of operated. And I think that's been really, really valuable for us. We have quarterly offsites now with that whole 100-odd people from product design and engineering where we come together and we talk about the tangible results. And those teams that I mentioned that are broken apart for each of the different products sit down and rewrite and relook at their OKRs every quarter and how they perform. So we do a look forward and a look back, and they get to do that themselves. There's no mandate from the top. We certainly have kind of company-wide objectives that trickle down, but that's been kind of really successful. And attaching design to product and engineering in the newsroom and the business in that sense has really kind of, I think, given us a lot more chance at a seat at the table when it comes to kind of the C-suite. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think we're about to run out of time, and I want to make sure that we have some time for questions from the audience as well. Just to wrap up with a bit of a classic question. If you were to give some advice to us, designers and product people, on working on digital products, what would you say to us?
I've probably got three things. One, I like three things. It's always easier to remember. One is, I think, around accessibility, and it's something we're doing more and more of, but I think as designers and engineers that we kind of play a critical role in that. And I think as a kind of collective, we should reframe it and think about designing for all abilities, because if you think of something like the Wall Street Journal, where we have 2.5 million subscribers and, or members, it's kind of about the right thing to do. So rather than it being a business risk or anything else, I think we kind of really should be thinking about just designing for all walks of life from the very beginning. So design products for everybody, and there's some ways to do that. I think we've proven that through doing a lot more kind of user testing recently, where the testing we do, we bring in stakeholders from across the business. So it's not just the UX team or the design team running these tests. We bring everyone in together. And so it removes that kind of like going into the world with an agenda and having any kind of bias attached to it as much as you possibly can. But it gives insight into things where people are trying to do something and can't, or whatever it might be. And that really changes the way that the rest of the organisation looks at it. So we've brought them in rather than kind of sending a report back out. And so they could see it for themselves. And I think, so that's my first point, is around we should just design things for everyone. And the second one is, I think, patience, which I mentioned earlier. I think it's really important. And I don't think a lot of people understand what we do. And so when I talk about patience, I mean, it's kind of our duty to also kind of educate people what we do and take the time to do it and be really patient with others that don't understand it. I'm sure all of you have the same problem that I do with explaining to my parents what I do. So I think, take the time to really think about it, and kind of, take people on that journey with you. And then I had a third one. What was my third one? I said 3 is good, right?
Yeah. We have some time.
So I think, no, let's leave it with 2. 2 is short and
all
sharp.
Right. Let's leave it 2. All right. I'm out of questions, so thank you on my behalf. Next up is Q&A. Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for your talk. I wanted to ask, and we got a glimpse of like your apps and the papers and stuff while you were talking. But my question is, when you are designing or like developing or building a design system, how do you make sure that kind of like the digital and the non-digital products, they align together? Because like, you know, we all have been perhaps like reading a little bit about it or working in design systems, and we mostly focus on digital products, but you have also very much physical products. So
it's a good question. So I think print in our organization obviously is a really important symbol of who we are. So I think while it's much easier to just make changes in print than it is in digital for lots of reasons, I think we basically as teams just try to stay in sync. So we actually launched kind of just an initiative through our editor-in-chief sending out a note to the company saying our kind of head of visuals whose team basically works on translating the journalism every day into the kind of digital products and the newspaper. Her and I basically would kind of, you know, join forces in making sure that would happen. So there was kind of a statement that went out so that everyone would buy into that kind of concept of having a holistic view and unifying everything under one aesthetic. So that's one thing that we've gone about doing. And then we're very aligned on that kind of repeatable use, identifying the core problems, reframing them, understanding them. So things like color use and things like that, really trying to kind of align, because things can live in all sorts of environments, like charts and tools for the editors that create charts, and market data is a very kind of big part of our DNA, can render in the newspaper, but also in any of our digital experiences as well. So they come from the same tool. So there are kind of aspects that we can kind of control through one kind of single point of entry. You mentioned also the apps. You know, we won the Webby Award recently for the best news apps. That was really cool. But part of that, I think, was also that we changed the curation to be mobile-centric. So when people look at the front page of the paper, I'm sure they think that it's obsessed over by all the editors across the whole company, and it is. But now on the same side, the front page of the mobile device, our iPhone app, is the same. There's a mobile curation team that obsesses over the curation of that content and news just as much. So all of those things are starting to link up, which helps us work with all of those different teams to make sure that the design system is in sync and they understand it and are on board with it too. So a lot of it's kind of the communication aspect.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for discussion. It was very interesting to hear. And you talk a lot about the mobile apps and the web content. What's the next step? So what's the next horizon? Are you already looking into utilizing virtual reality, augmented reality, any other immersive tech in visualizing data, for example?
Yeah, so all of the above. I think one thing to look at is that as a product design and engineering team, we think of three audiences. One is advertisers, two is our editors, and three is our readers. So I think when we think about coming up with new advertising propositions, that's one way of looking at it, but also, like, for example, like our editorial tools for the editors, they're there, our users are right there, we can just walk over and talk to them. So building in, you know, assistance for helping reporters and journalists kind of do their job with research better, and enhancing that part of it is things we're experimenting with. On the kind of consumer-facing experience side, recently we partnered with our innovation team internally, and our product team led by Jordan Sudi also worked on a augmented reality ad, the first of its kind with Google, which we built for Nespresso. So you can place the Nespresso machine on the counter and then go and buy it, all through the mobile app. As an advertisement. And then on the journalism side, again, just partnering with our newsroom to look at opportunities. So we always think of it from the storytelling point of view, not the technology point of view. So what's the story, and do any of those technologies kind of enhance it and make it a better reading experience and make it more engaging and interesting and help tell the story in a certain way. So Cassini is another great example that you can look up on the app, where we built a VR kind of interactive immersive experience. We've also done another one with market data. So the markets, because we have a lot of real-time information on the markets, we built a whole view of the markets. Again, augmented reality, you can kind of place it on the table or anywhere and just spin it around and interact with it and get all of the stock prices live real time in AR.
If I may, a short follow-up question. You mentioned
Yeah.
the internal innovation team.
Yeah.
So who's driving this type of next step technologies and design? Is it the innovation team or is it your team?
Right. So it's absolutely kind of like a nice marriage of all of the above, because there's also lots of other departments in the company. So innovation comes from everywhere, and as a technology organization, just recently we've a lot of things have spawned out of hackathons that we've run. So it's not just one area or another. They come from all walks of life. Often now we'll kind of just want to slice off and run a design sprint for 5 days, and then take that as a kind of proof of concept and test it with users, and then not be scared to just throw it in the trash at the end of it. So it comes from everywhere. There's no kind of one place or single origin of innovation.
Thank you.
Hi, and thank you for the interesting talk. About spreading the knowledge of design in the company, you mentioned that the importance of building trust, I guess, was like all levels of stakeholders, and then the massive emails. What other activities, or if you could just dwell more upon this subject?
Yeah, so I think it's also kind of facilitation. So, and that can be in all sorts of areas. So, being quite proactive to bring people together and reframe things as problems or opportunities. So, understanding, for example, like let's say it's redesigning the top area of the website on the homepage, bringing together a bunch of journalists, editors, people from across the business together, and reframing their pain points as things that we could express in kind of a digital way, and what do they mean. And so I think that's one thing, is to get kind of hands-on and not be on your computer using Sketch and coding and all that kind of stuff. It's really just kind of, I guess, helping people extract kind of what they mean. I think that often is something we aren't as good as we could be at. I think just kind of reframing problems in the right way for the team to properly go about it is a skill that is everyone has. It's just, it's asking questions until you really kind of get to something that everyone feels like that's the real problem, that's what we want to address. And bringing then separately to that, the other thing that I would say is kind of from a UX kind of research point of view, having them embedded in each of the teams is then translating information and from all walks of the business. So from our analytics, we have a huge customer service department that gives us reports on people calling up and complaining about things or whatever it might be, to, obviously like sentiment on social media, to the App Store reviews, to testing that we've run, to, all of those different kind of things, focus groups, etc. So all of those data points, and then synthesizing them and using them as kind of like, here are some recommendations and some action items for this team around navigation for the iPad. So it's not just a bunch of reports anymore, it's kind of brought right back down to the whole team. And then that team is kind of understanding what it means as well. So it's kind of a lot of translating in that respect. Does that help? Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the interview. Now we have a lot more news and information than we did have in the print era, and the publishing cycle is also very much faster paced than it used to be, but also we have a lot of new tools, digital tools. So how do you see that it has changed the possibility to give design love to single individual piece of news or feature in your publications, and how it perhaps will change that in the future?
Do you mean like a bespoke design for a certain story? Yeah, so I think, it's a great question. We tackle it a lot because of the fast-paced fact. I think we have about 130 stories on average a day that we write, because we have 1,500 or so journalists across the world. So it is a challenge. I think everyone wants something new all the time. And I think, but we're aligned now internally, maybe less so in the past, that we want things that are reusable, that make sense, and that express the stories in the right way. Like out of a hackathon, a good example is like just tap-based stories. So it's not something new. It's, you know, it's obviously Snapchat-based, but what that allowed us to do was work with the journalists and say, hey, you know, you actually need to think about maybe writing the story a slightly different way. This is kind of snippet-based information versus a long-form read or whatever it might be. And then building that into a tool, if it takes off, if the readers love it, if the journalists have embraced it, then we can kind of start baking that back in. So I think we're in a pretty good spot with how we do that now. It's going to get better and better, no doubt. And so our tools and things will get more and more advanced. And we actually have a pretty good editorial tools team now that's been formed in the last 6 months or so that is just purely focused on building all those, maintaining them, improving them, and working with the editors and journalists to constantly kind of do that.
Yeah, hello. Also, thank you for your talk. So I was wondering, some of us are getting tired of being hooked to the phone in the next news article. So I guess the first kind of adopters are out there who say, I don't read any news. And blogs like Mr. Money Mustache, you read the recommendation to don't follow news at all. So is this something where you think what lies beyond the horizon when people don't want to do that digital channel at all anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I think people will still want to be informed with what's happening in the world. So I think there'll always be a place for news. But to your point of kind of saturation and platforms that are obviously trying to get you hooked and read the next thing, look, it's a tension. Like I always err on the side of let's do the right thing. let's not cause more anxiety and addiction to your mobile phone. I think just let's build products that people really love and want to go back to when they want to go back to them. So I think, you know, there's ways of doing that, but there's also kind of important events that happen that, you know, we have a team that works on the strategy for push notifications and so like that's obviously encouraging people to kind of come back into the app, but there's also a due service from a news organisation standpoint to inform people of what's happening and keep them up to date. So it's a complicated one. I think there's hopefully good balances in there, but I always err on the side of let's, you know, push humanity forward, not make everyone stressed and feel like they have no time to do anything. Yeah.
It just came to mind. How do you measure success? So you have all these stories, you have global presence, you have all the journalists and readers, and they come back all the time. But how do you actually know that the design that you have created or the design system you have pushed out is the correct one for this point?
Yeah, so I think, like, again, kind of integrating with product and engineering and editorial, now we kind of have this methodology of using objectives and key results to think about how we do that and reporting back every time. So each of the teams can actually look at even the most tiny thing. You know, we're getting the information from all the reporting and analytics tools that we use. We're getting feedback from customer service. So we have these kind of 6 really big kind of data points that come in that we use to measure things by. So we set out with a clear objective and results and key results that we want to target. And they're measurable, and so we kind of come back and we look at them, and I think that's been really, really successful over the last kind of 12 months or so.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I think the time limit has probably gone for us now. Thanks so much, Chair, for Hannu,
thank you very much for having me. Thanks for everyone for coming. Listen.
And I think we could have a last applause for you. Woo.